China attacks U.S. oil tanker and pays a heavy price. September 23, 2025. In the contested waters of the South China Sea, a Chinese Type 052D destroyer unleashed 12 YJ-12 supersonic anti-ship missiles, each moving at nearly Mach 3, aimed straight at the U.S. oil tanker Liberty Sentinel. On board, 27 American crew members and 550,000 barrels of crude oil worth $42 billion, a floating fortune bound for the U.S. base at Puerto Princesa, Palawan. By its side, the USS Barry DDG-52, a $2 billion guided missile destroyer with 370 sailors and Marines, stood as the lone shield. The Aegis system roared to life, intercepting 10 of the 12 missiles. But 2 broke through. In seconds, steel ruptured, fire engulfed the decks, and the sea turned black with burning oil. China celebrated, but America would answer. Within the hour, 2 EA-18G Growler aircraft, 2 B-2 Spirit stealth bombers, and 10 Tomahawk cruise missiles were already inbound. What would fall on Woody Island? And what price would Beijing pay for this reckless strike? Let's find out. September 23, 2025. 8 a.m. The South China Sea looked deceptively calm, but beneath that quiet surface, an American convoy was carrying a fortune. The U.S. oil tanker Liberty Sentinel, a steel giant with 27 crew members aboard, was pushing westward, its belly loaded with over 550,000 barrels of crude oil, valued at more than $42 billion on global markets. The destination, the U.S. forward base at Puerto Princesa in Palawan, just 310 nautical miles away. It wasn't alone. Shadowing its every move was the guided missile destroyer USS Barry DDG-52, packed with 370 sailors and Marines. Together, they formed a moving fortress, fully aware that their path cut straight through Beijing's self-declared wall of control. At 8:40, tensions rose. U.S. sensors detected the faint electronic signature of a Chinese Type 052D destroyer, its hull facing down toward the horizon. Its 64 missile launchers and advanced radar locked on like the eyes of a predator. No warning, no radio squeal, just the silent shadow of steel. Analysts in Washington had warned of this moment. Beijing considered any American supply line in the South China Sea a legitimate target. By 9:15, the atmosphere on the Barry was electric. Combat information centers glowed red as state of emergency was declared. Crew members strapped into position, damage control teams sealed bulkheads, and gunners stood ready at Phalanx C-1WS launchers capable of firing 4,500 rounds per minute. Everyone understood. An attack on the tanker would not only result in human casualties, but would also undermine U.S. credibility and cause hundreds of millions of dollars in damage in a single morning. At 9:45 a.m., the Chinese Type 052D destroyer suddenly launched 12 YJ-12 supersonic anti-ship missiles roaring into the sky, each capable of tearing through the air at speeds of nearly Mach 3 and carrying a 450-kilogram warhead at just one target. Oil tanker. In just one salvo, Beijing spent more than $180 million on precision firepower to destroy an American tanker. Aboard the USS Barry, an alarm blared. The Aegis combat system activated, locking onto the incoming missiles. Sailors scrambled to fire the ship's vertical launch system, salvo of standard missiles into the air, silver streaks of light hurtling toward their prey. Within seconds, the interceptor collided head-on with the incoming YJ-12S. The explosions were deafening, and thunder rumbled across the sea like war drums. The results were spectacular. 10 missiles were destroyed mid-flight, each worth more than an American house. But the system was suddenly overwhelmed. The last 2 missiles got through. They struck the Liberty Sentinel with brutal precision. One hit the starboard hull, tearing through the steel like paper. The second hit the fuel tank, igniting hundreds of thousands of gallons of crude oil in a fireball that shot 400 feet into the sky. The impact was catastrophic. 3 American sailors died instantly. 12 others were severely burned and injured by the explosion. Some were thrown overboard, helpless in the sea of fire and smoke. On the bridge of the Barry, officers gave the order: lower lifeboats, hoses down the burning deck, while medics rushed to pull survivors from the black, suffocating water. From satellites overhead, the scene was clear. A column of black smoke visible from nearly 60 miles away, the tanker aflame like a beacon of American weakness. In Beijing, state commanders signaled mission accomplished. Congratulations were beamed back to the capital. For the Chinese Navy, it was the propaganda victory they craved, proof that American steel could bleed. But victory was illusory. While Chinese officers congratulated themselves, on the USS Barry, fire crews extinguished the blaze and Marines carried their wounded comrades to safety. The cost was real: $42 billion in lost cargo, 15 casualties, and one ship crippled. But the U.S. Navy was not broken. It was angry. The silence after the explosion was more deafening than the blast itself. In Washington, the streets were lit in red. This was no longer a defensive escort mission. It had become an act of war, and America's response would be immeasurable. It would be devastating. By 10 a.m., the South China Sea was no longer just a contested waterway. It was a battlefield. The U.S. had lost $42 million in crude oil, 3 sailors dead, and 12 more gravely wounded. Washington's patience evaporated in minutes. The attack on Liberty Sentinel was not a skirmish. It was an assault on America's credibility. Inside the Combat Information Center of USS Barry, encrypted lines crackled alive. PACOM relayed a simple directive: retaliate. Immediate. Within 7 minutes, a battle plan worth over $2.5 billion in deployed assets was activated. First, the call to Guam. 2 EA-18G Growlers, each fitted with $90 million next-generation jamming pods, scrambled into the sky. Their mission: blind Chinese sensors, drown every radar pulse in static, and sow chaos across command channels. Simultaneously, 2 B-2 Spirit stealth bombers, each valued at a staggering $2.1 billion, were vectored toward Woody Island. Their payload: precision-guided bombs designed to shred hardened radar bunkers and silence HQ-9 launch batteries before they could breathe fire. On Barry's deck, sailors armed the vertical launch system. 10 Tomahawk cruise missiles, each carrying a 1,000-pound high-explosive warhead, were programmed to annihilate Woody Island's 2,700-meter runway and its military port, the very staging ground for China's J-11 and J-16 squadrons. The cost of the strike alone exceeded $100 million, but the objective was priceless: restore deterrence. By 10:40 a.m., the pieces were in motion. Growlers streaked toward their targets, B-2s flew silent in the upper stratosphere, and Barry's launch tubes locked hot. The men and women aboard knew what was at stake. This was no longer about defending a tanker. It was about rewriting the balance of power in the South China Sea. And when the American hammer fell, it would fall without mercy. Don't go anywhere. The American counterstrike you're about to witness will change everything you thought you knew about this battle. At 10:42 a.m., the American counterstrike began. From 36,000 feet, 2 B-2 Spirit stealth bombers slid silently across the stratosphere. Below, Woody Island, Beijing's crown jewel in the South China Sea, was bristling with radar domes, missile batteries, and nearly 2,000 PLA Navy personnel stationed across bunkers, hangars, and hardened shelters. To China, this island was a fortress. To the U.S., it had become target number 1. The Growlers arrived first. Their $90 million jamming pods unleashed an invisible storm, scrambling frequencies across a 400-mile radius. On Chinese radar screens, the sea became a blur of ghosts and static. Commanders shouted into dead radios, their HQ-9 air defense operators suddenly blind to the skies. Confusion spread like wildfire, exactly as Washington had intended. Then came the hammer. At 10:47, the B-2s released their payload: 8 precision-guided GBU-57 bunker buster bombs, each weighing over 30,000 pounds, the heaviest non-nuclear weapons in the U.S. arsenal. Within seconds, the first impacts tore through Woody Island's radar array, collapsing reinforced bunkers as if they were sandcastles. Shockwaves ripped across the base, shattering concrete and silencing the island's command center in less than 2 minutes. Almost simultaneously, USS Barry's deck erupted. 10 Tomahawk cruise missiles launched in sequence, streaking low across the waves at 550 miles per hour. The first 4 slammed into the 2,700-meter runway, tearing it apart in craters more than 50 feet wide, rendering the strip useless. The island's HQ-9 batteries managed to intercept 2 Tomahawks, but the defense was futile. The remaining 4 missiles targeted the naval port and fuel depots. Explosions lit the sky as 1.2 million gallons of aviation fuel ignited, creating a fireball visible from 70 miles away. By 11:05 a.m., the airfield was in ruins, over 22 J-11 and J-16 fighters destroyed on the ground, their twisted frames burning in a chain of secondary detonations. The port was left in chaos, 2 corvettes gutted, piers collapsing into the sea, and ammunition depots detonating with the force of 200 tons of TNT. Casualties were staggering. Initial estimates put 150 Chinese personnel dead and more than 325 wounded or missing, many trapped beneath collapsed hangars. It was the single deadliest strike against a PLA outpost since the Korean War. As flames engulfed Woody Island, the message was undeniable. China's fortress had turned into a graveyard in less than half an hour. For every missile they had fired at Liberty Sentinel, the US had returned a storm of steel worth billions. Precision, overwhelming, and merciless. And the world was watching. From Tokyo to London, news channels broadcast the inferno live. Beijing's silence was deafening. The Battle of September 23rd was no longer about a tanker. It was about global power, and China had just been dealt a blow it could never hide. By 12 p.m., the flames over Woody Island still clawed at the sky. What had been China's most fortified outpost in the South China Sea just hours earlier now lay in ruins. The numbers told a chilling story. In less than one morning, Beijing had lost nearly $3.8 billion in aircraft and naval hardware, including 22 frontline fighters, 2 corvettes, and irreplaceable radar installations. Casualties were worse. Over 150 Chinese personnel confirmed dead, more than 325 wounded or missing, a human cost that could not be hidden behind propaganda. Yet America had paid its own price. The Liberty Sentinel still burned in the waves, its 550,000 barrels of crude oil, worth $42 billion, lost to the sea and sky. For the families of the 3 sailors killed and 12 scarred by fire, no retaliation could erase the grief. USS Barry's decks bore the scars of battle too. Smoke blackened, its crew exhausted after saving comrades from the cold water and fighting flames that refused to die. Freedom, once again, had been paid for in blood. But strategically, the outcome was unmistakable. China had sought a quick humiliation of the United States, hoping to cripple its supply line and prove dominance over the South China Sea. Instead, it suffered its worst military disaster since 1949, a defeat televised to the entire world. Beijing's boast of invincibility had evaporated in 30 minutes of American fury. For Washington, the message was as old as history. Deterrence lives not in words, but in action. Even under sudden attack, even with blood on the waves, the U.S. Navy could adapt, strike back, and crush an adversary's stronghold. Technology mattered, but so did discipline, training, and the will to finish the fight. By sunset, analysts were already calling September 23rd the new Pearl Harbor reversed. China struck first, but it was America that ended the day standing, while Beijing counted its dead in silence. Across Asia, allies took note. In Tokyo, Manila, Hanoi, and Taipei, leaders saw not just fire on an island, but proof that the balance of power had not shifted east. The lesson was seared into history. Reckless aggression carries a cost greater than any prize. For China, the gamble ended in ashes. For America, it was a painful but undeniable reminder. Freedom survives not by chance, but by strength. As the sun set on September 23, 2025, the South China Sea was no longer calm water. It was scarred by fire, oil slicks, and wreckage, evidence of a battle that stunned the world. The Liberty Sentinel burned, her cargo of 550,000 barrels of crude worth $42 billion lost forever. 3 Americans dead, 12 wounded, and a ship that would never sail again. Their sacrifice, their suffering, became the human face of this confrontation. Across the horizon, Woody Island smoldered. What Beijing once paraded as an unsinkable fortress now lay crippled. Over 150 Chinese sailors and soldiers killed, 325 wounded or missing, more than $3.8 billion in fighters, ships, and infrastructure erased in 30 minutes. A defeat not only military, but psychological, televised to the entire world, shattering the illusion of Chinese naval invulnerability. But the deeper story is this: America was attacked and America responded. Not with hesitation, not with compromise, but with decisive, overwhelming force. That is the lesson of September 23rd. Deterrence is not words in a press release. It is steel in the water, discipline under fire, and the will to retaliate when struck. For our allies, this was reassurance. For our adversaries, it was a warning carved into history. The United States does not start wars. But when war is forced upon it, America will finish it, swiftly, brutally, and decisively. And now, I ask you, the viewer, what does this battle tell us about the future? Was this China's gamble gone wrong, or the opening chapter of a much larger storm still to come? If you value strength, if you believe the world must see the truth, then like, share, and subscribe. Because this story is not over, and together, we will continue to uncover what comes next.